Look, it's a pleasure to be here today. So look, thank you, Tony, for the introduction, and thank you for having me here today. And look, I'd just reiterate Dan's words earlier about the dairy industry, in my view, being ahead of the curve in a number of areas, and there's a proud history of doing that, but Dan's exactly right. The momentum is here for a whole lot of new requirements, not just for dairy farmers, but for other farmers and also other producers in New Zealand that we're all going to have to respond to. And in actual fact, respond is not the word. We need to get ahead, and then we will not be fighting these arguments from behind like the sector's done so often in the past. When I was talking with Tony Pearce about what I was going to talk about today, we did put a bit of a working title down, and looking at this prior to today, I actually am not sure we quite got it right, but there's a bit of everything in there really. It's about why do we need a new story? And I've been talking about this for about the last 6 or 7 years. Some perspectives on trade, the CCPTP, and of course these things are very, these little shortening of the trade agreements, that's what we specialise in, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then also just some of the environmental stewardship issues that I think are quite important. In my role travelling as New Zealand's Special Agricultural Trade Envoy, and yes, it's a very wordy title, basically it just means that I'm a roving ambassador for New Zealand's agriculture and horticultural sector. I'm privileged to get an insight into a number of the big issues that are facing us offshore. And I have been arguing for some time that the story of New Zealand's products and goods as they go to the world is too fragmented, and it's not good enough in the challenging environment that we're starting to see. There's a lot of talk at the moment around alternative proteins. Look, frankly, you know, we've had soy milk and almond milk and coconut milk forever. People seem to think these are new things. They've been around for a long time. And in the meat industry, you'll see Beef and Lamb New Zealand have done a very good report about alternative proteins and what it might mean. Look, all of these things will certainly be products that consumers will enjoy for a whole host of reasons. And I'm not certainly afraid of those. I think we need to be very aware of what they are and what they mean to people and the sort of drivers that they have amongst consumers and in key markets, so that we can then promote ourselves and our products in the most appropriate way. And so my call for a new story is really because there is not a story today that people relate to New Zealand. New Zealand really does have an incredible reputation for our products and our goods in the world markets. People love New Zealand as they love our style, the way we do things, much less out there than our Australian mates, more humble, a bit more reserved, a bit more trusted, wanting to form closer relationships and actually do them in a more meaningful way. You know, the integrity of our production is unparalleled. The integrity of our systems is unparalleled when you look at other countries in the world. But in order to stay ahead of the game, we need to have a story and promote ourselves, in my view, as the natural alternative. And so I think that there's a big opportunity, and I know the New Zealand story, they do a very good job at promoting New Zealand. Many of you mightn't have heard of the New Zealand story, but we had the 100% Pure campaign, which of course is more a tourism campaign. And the New Zealand story has 3 themes to it. And I'll give a chocolate fish to anyone who knows them, except McFarlane's not allowed to because he probably does. But who knows the 3 themes of the New Zealand story? Has anyone heard of them? No. Open hearts, open spaces, open minds. And the imagery is fantastic. But, you know, for me, that just does not link with things that we can do, link with the products that we take to the world. And so there's quite a bit of thinking about how New Zealand can promote its products into markets that actually has a real link with what we do from the primary sector. We're actually sort of starting to talk more about the agri-food sector than the primary sector, to be honest. I think the primary sector makes it sound like it's a commodity business. I think we need to talk much more about agri-food. So there are a number of groups that are looking at this. The Minister, Damien O'Connor, has tasked Lane Jager. I understand he didn't talk about that this morning. He has a ministerial advisory group that he chairs that's been tasked with a vision. The dairy industry's been working with other sectors in New Zealand around the Farming Leaders Group and talking about maybe some concepts of what a vision might mean for the sector. And importantly, if I can just talk to you briefly about it, it is very much talking about upfront working with nature, and I think we need to think about the importance of nature here and what sets us apart in New Zealand compared to products offshore. Working with nature to create a valued food, and of course that can mean a whole host of things for different people, from the most beautiful and trusted place on earth. That's some of the thinking that's happening now about, how can we link the trust that New Zealanders are held in, the integrity of our food production, the valued food that is valued by many, many people in a whole host of ways, with our natural credentials. And look, there is a number of conversations happening. In my view, they're still too fragmented, and we need to pull this all together, but I think the opportunity is there. I won't bore you with the story of Origin Green, because I'm sure many of you have heard about Origin Green. The Irish, it's a pure piece of Irish magic that they started 8 years ago, and as only the Irish can do, they can tell a great story. It started out as really a great story with not much in behind it, but now they're filling the back room with the tools and the integrity and the authenticity that they need to really take that to the world in a meaningful way. So they do some very good things, the Irish, and I'm not suggesting we copy them. I think that we need to take the next step beyond Origin Green and have our products go to the world. So look, I think there are opportunities in that for the dairy industry. I know that you have a very good story to tell, and look, I certainly, again, congratulate the work you've done in the animal welfare, the velvet work, and the accreditation schemes. It is a no-nonsense scheme, and it is going to be taken very seriously, and it'll be part of what I'll talk about at the end when I talk about some of the environmental credentials, because I think it goes beyond that. I'd just like to do a little bit on trade for a minute, because I think this is still very, very important. And in my role as the trade envoy, we are working hard to try and make sure that we keep markets open, that we can open new markets, that we can get better access into existing markets. And Vangelis Vitalis is our lead negotiator. He's probably one of the most brilliant individuals I've ever met. And he is the guy that's tasked with effectively doing this on behalf of New Zealand. Someone wrote an article the other day, it might have been John Tamahiri, I think, about the faceless bureaucrats that sit in New Zealand's ministries. And if it wasn't John, then I apologise, but I think it was. And I thought it was completely unfair. When I look at the work that some of these people are doing on the international stage, we have some of the very best people in the world doing this stuff, and we actually need to work with them rather than sort of try and pull them down. But he talked the other day about the importance of the World Trade Organization, and we have to remember that before 1995, there were no rules for international trade. And when the World Trade Organization was formed in 95, and that wasn't that long ago, it was and remains the only body that has binding set of rules around trade internationally. And so it's actually very, very important that we make sure that we keep the international trading environment going and functioning properly. I mean, certainly for New Zealand, remember we export over 90% of what we produce in nearly every product that we produce. So for us, this matters more to us than any other country on earth. It's why we spend so much time trying to keep these institutions working and functioning, and why we keep trying to get markets open around the world. So the World Trade Organization has been functioning relatively well. Now look, it takes a long time to do anything. There are 164 member countries, and you need to reach consensus on nearly every decision. But it is a very, very important piece of the architecture that actually means New Zealand can trade with the world. And that right now is under threat. That really is under threat. And so New Zealanders should be very concerned that the international trading system could start to break down. So it's stuff that we're working on a lot. We're working very hard on. We have been frustrated over the last 15 years, or 20 years really, that the World Trade Organization hasn't made more progress, particularly in market access. And you'll have seen a whole host of trade arrangements that have happened between New Zealand and other countries, either in a bilateral sense or in a plurilateral sense, like the CCPTP. So we are still trying to make sure that we can do those bilateral agreements. We've got a whole host of projects on the go at the moment, from the CCPTP, getting that completed later this year. I'll talk about that in a minute. Of course, one of the real focus at the moment, areas of focus at the moment, is what's happening up in Europe with Brexit and the UK pulling away from Europe. We want to make sure that we can protect our existing access into those markets, first and foremost, through the Brexit process, and then look at how we have a new trade agreement into Europe with New Zealand and also in the UK with New Zealand as well. We are actually hoping next week to get the mandate from Europe to start negotiating officially with them to form a new agreement. I'm actually heading up into Europe next weekend to hopefully try and push the case along as well. And we are, and have been told that we are at or near the top of the queue for the UK when the UK can start negotiating following Brexit date in March 2019. So they're very, very important for us. I've been really, really strong in saying that New Zealand needs access to affluent markets if we're going to continue to expect consumers to pay top dollar for our quality products. In the past, many of our trade agreements have been with countries that have relatively low GDP per capita and a number of less wealthy people that don't have the ability to pay for our wealthy products. And we need to make sure that we have access into the very most affluent markets in the world if we're going to get true value from our added value products. So the TPP and all of this, the CCPTP, look, this is huge for us. And I know that for the deer industry, the numbers are relatively small, but I'll talk about why it matters for the deer industry in a minute. 15% of the world's GDP, 500 million people. You know, this is still a big agreement without the US being involved. 11 countries around the Asia Pacific, which is the fastest growing region on earth. For New Zealand to be in this agreement is an absolute, we have to be there, it's an absolute must. Could you possibly think of CCPTP going ahead without New Zealand and the other 10 countries completing a deal? Look, that's always the scenario I come back to and say, you know, reality is if we opted out of this agreement, then we would lose our preferential access to all of those markets probably forever. So we have to be there. It's estimated there will be about $220 million of tariff savings over time. About 100 million of those will be on entry into force. And we're hoping that this will happen now quite quickly. The agreement will come into force when a majority of the 11 countries, so 6 out of the 11 countries, ratify this agreement in their own country. We already have Mexico's gone ahead and they're first. I'm expecting that the next 5 countries will hopefully ratify this by the end of the year, and then there's a 60-day stand-down period and the agreement actually starts taking effect. Very, very important for New Zealand to be in the first 6, and we're pushing hard to make that happen. One of the things I think we need to think about with CCPTP is there are a number of countries, additional countries, that want to join. So while we look at the current benefits, we need to also remember that the likes of Korea, and I know of big interest to the deer industry, other countries like Indonesia, like Thailand even, have expressed an interest in joining. And look, I think there is serious interest from the UK about joining the CCPTP. I know that's been poo-pooed by a number of people, but you know what a great way for the UK to get an opportunity in the Asia Pacific than to join this agreement of fast-growing nations. So look, we want that to happen quite quickly, and the opportunity, of course, with new countries joining is we get the chance to negotiate again with those new countries as they come into this agreement. So think about CCPTP not necessarily just as it is now, but what it might be at some stage in the future. Okay, I just want to move on, and hopefully we may have time for, or Tony said questions later, but let's go. I just want to move on to quickly around some of the environmental credentials. And look, as Dan said, you know, the deer industry has been leading a lot of this. Look, there's a lot of discussion happening around environmental credentials and what it really means amongst the sectors, and as I say, the deer industry is involved in the farming leaders group that are talking about this as well. Look, that farming leaders group doesn't speak for the sector. The important thing about that group is it has all of the chairs sitting around a table trying to make sure that the sector itself is aligned in its views and thinking. For too long, I've seen the sector and individual sectors from the primary sector argue their corner and go and argue for different perspectives when it comes to regulatory and government policy. In my view, the sector's far stronger together. We're far better to have those discussions behind a closed door and then present a united position to government and regulators to make sure we get the best outcome. But look, the direction of travel is clear. And I say this for the environment, and I say this for emissions as well. And Dan didn't reference, or you did reference the ETS, but I think of more significance will be the Zero Carbon Act that's going to be put in place. This ambition to be zero net emissions is real, and in my view, the sector needs to get on board with this and get on board with it in a big way. It's going to be really, really tough. We don't actually understand what zero net carbon or zero net emissions really means, and it's going to take a lot of work for us to really get to the bottom of what sort of changes we might need to make in order for this to happen. And I know this is a difficult one with farmers, a very, very difficult one, but this government has pledged to work with farmers and to give long transition times and to help with new technologies that might be able to be adopted on farms to try and make this happen. I just say again to all farmers and all farming groups I'm talking to at the moment, we just need to remember the direction of travel here is clear. I don't think, even if there was a change of government, that a new government, a new national government, would come back and reverse any of this work. I really don't. I mean, could you possibly see a new government coming in and reinstating gas and oil exploration? It just won't happen in my view. And so I think we need to get on the bus. One of the things that I think is really important, and there's been a bit of discussion about, and I think you'll hear a lot more discussion about in the future, is the need for these plans. And I know you've got a number of plans in the dairy industry. Every farm should have a farm environment management plan. I think it's going to go further than that. I think that we will be talking about a single farm plan that covers our environmental stewardship, that covers our animal welfare, that covers our traceability and tracking movements, NATE compliance, that covers our progress towards emissions, zero net emissions. I think we'll have one single farm plan that will need to include all of those things, and that I know will be challenging for some farmers, but I think that will be the direction of travel. We will need that plan because, and this comes back to the beginning, we'll need that plan because that will be the evidence of the integrity of what we do for the story that New Zealand needs to promote. You cannot have a story without the back room being filled with the evidence to support and back up the claims that you're going to make in the market. And in my view, that will create the difference. That will allow us to differentiate ourselves as the natural, unprocessed alternative to some of these other challenges that are coming at our sector right now. So look, hopefully that's a bit thought-provoking. I know some of that will be uncomfortable. Happy to cover questions off later on, Tony, but thanks for your time and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Mike. Just looking at the time, we've probably got time for a couple of quick questions now if anyone's got those forefront in their mind. So anyone got any questions for Mike?
Yeah, Mike, just while you're there, it'd be interesting to get your perspective on whether you think that new ways of trading, direct online stuff, etc., are going to circumvent political trade barriers the way we know them currently.
Yeah, it's a very good question, Andy. And look, in my view, the routes to market will be far more disruptive to our country and our sectors than the alternative proteins. I honestly think that the opportunity now to trade directly with a family in Los Angeles or San Francisco is here. I have a view that processing companies will become possibly processing companies and a service provider that links a family in San Francisco with a farmer back here in New Zealand. I think routes to market through, as Andy says, through online trading, the opportunity to actually ship product around the world in quite short duration these days. Whether you look at the Whole Foods, the acquisition of Whole Foods by online retailers, if you look at Alibaba and what they're planning to do, this scene's completely changed. And so I think we need to pay far more attention to the routes to market than we're currently doing at the moment.
Will that make some of the government trade
Sorry.
regulations redundant?
No, it won't. No, it won't. You will still have to. You'll still have to abide by the rules of trade, and that will be done by probably someone at the other end that will cover off those obligations for you. But where tariffs exist and where barriers exist, it does not excuse you from any of those rules of trade that have been agreed by each country. One at the back.
Yeah, Mike, I was just wondering, I don't whether you can answer this or not, but we're looking at our image and we're looking at sort of reducing nitrate leaching and everything else. Then we start using these grasses and herbs that might be GM bred. What's your thoughts on that? Because some of those herbs that we can use for grazing are pretty much game changers.
Yes, yeah. This is a big debate New Zealand has to have, and I know that right now I'm in the space where I think there are opportunities for us to be hormone-free, antibiotic-free, GM-free at the moment. So I think there are opportunities there. But there are going to be some tools that come along, and I think gene editing is one. We're going to see in Australia shortly where I think the definition is going to change, where gene editing is no longer part of the genetic modification stable. And gene editing could actually be a big, big help for us in our environmental challenges. So there will be a really interesting debate at some stage about whether we're prepared to use gene editing as one of the tools in the toolbox to help mitigate our environmental challenges. So look, I think the debate will be real, and it's likely to come forward quite quickly once we start looking at some of those tools being available.